Welcome to today's deep dive. It is Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. And I have to say, the materials we're looking at today are pretty heavy.
Yeah, heavy is probably an understatement. It's a lot to process.
Right. So for everyone listening, I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine calling the fire department because your house is literally burning down.
Okay, a total emergency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're standing on the lawn, you're panicked, watching the flames. The truck pulls up, but instead of, unrolling the hoses, the firefighters walk up to your front door, change the locks, spray a layer of gasoline on the porch, and then hand you a mandatory bill for $60,000.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like an absolute dystopian nightmare.
It does, right. And if you complain, the fire chief threatens to have you arrested. But the thing is, for thousands of people across the country, that's not hypothetical. That is their literal reality.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Right. So our mission today is to step inside this massive, newly synthesized intelligence package. It's titled 1,953 Families, 50 States, One Broken System.
Compiled by the Stand With Meg agent.
Yes, exactly. And we're going to analyze this data to understand why thousands of parents are claiming that the U.S. Family Court and Child Protective Services System's CPS aren't just failing by accident.
Right. The claim here is that they are operating as systematic engines of family destruction.
Which is a wild claim until you look at the sources. What exactly are we working with here?
So we have a mountain of materials. It's a 12-slide national intelligence deck, plus this incredibly dense, granular, state-by-state data report.
And it's all documenting the exact financial, temporal, and emotional costs reported by those 1,953 families.
Right. This isn't just like a few disgruntled Yelp reviews about a bad judge. It's a massive empirical footprint.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get into the mechanisms how this works, we need to set the tone. This data crosses every geographic and political boundary.
Yeah, this really isn't a left versus right issue.
Not at all. Our goal today is not to take political sides. We're here to objectively examine the data and treat the voices of these parents as the primary evidence.
Which means we have to start by fundamentally redefining the scope of the problem.
Right, because usually when you hear a horror story about a custody battle or a CPS intervention, society just sort of reflexes to, oh, that's an anomaly.
Exactly. We label it a tragic bureaucratic mistake or, just blame the single bad apple judge.
But the numbers completely shatter that bad apple myth.
They really do. Like we said, 1,953 documented cases across all 50 states. And out of those, 968 families are currently trapped in what the data calls a stuck status.
Stuck, meaning zero resolution pathway.
Right. They are actively caught in the gears right now. Over 45% of these cases exceed a minimum of 1 to 3 years of continuous litigation.
Which is already a long time in a kid's life. But then I was looking at this, 202 families have been trapped for over 10 years.
Yes, a decade. 10 years of continuous court dates.
That's just, I have to push back on this conventional wisdom we all have. If the system is supposedly built to protect the best interests of the child, how can nearly 1,000 families have a zero resolution pathway?
That's the core question.
Like, is the system broken or is it working exactly as intended? Because think of this like a national grid failure.
Okay, how so?
Well, if one house loses power, it's a blown fuse. But if 1,953 houses across all 50 states lose power in the exact same way, the power plant itself is compromised.
That's a great analogy. And what's fascinating here is why this data matters. When an identical pattern occurs across 50 distinct state jurisdictions, it points to a systemic design.
And there's this other factor the briefing calls double jeopardy. What is that?
So 779 families in this data set are forced to navigate both family court and CPS simultaneously.
Which sounds like a nightmare. Why is that double jeopardy?
Because the two systems operate under conflicting constitutional rules. A CPS investigation is quasi-criminal.
So you have a Fifth Amendment right to remain silent.
Exactly. Anything you say can be used to build a criminal case against you. But family court is civil. So if you invoke your Fifth Amendment right in family court...
Oh, wait, the judge can hold that against you.
Yes. They're legally allowed to draw an adverse inference. They can assume your silence implies guilt and strip you of custody.
So if you stay silent to protect yourself from criminal charges, you lose your kids. But if you talk to save your kids, CPS uses it to arrest you.
You're completely trapped. Compliance in one system guarantees destruction in the other.
Wow. Okay, so if we're looking at a national crisis like a grid failure, we have to map the epicenters. Where does this systemic fire burn the hottest?
The geographic breakdown is wild. The top 10 crisis states start with California at 164 submissions.
Then Texas with 115, right?
Yeah, Texas, then Kansas with 114, Florida 93, Ohio 90, Missouri 85.
But Michigan has 77, Pennsylvania 74, North Carolina 68, and Illinois 59.
But the volume is only half the story. The extreme anomalies within these states are what really stand out. Let's talk about Pennsylvania,
Okay, Pennsylvania. The average case duration there is 162 months.
which is 13 and a half years.
I mean, let's just extrapolate that for a second. If a child is an infant when the case starts, it won't end until they're in high school.
The legal process literally outlasts the childhood it's supposed to regulate.
And then you look at California, they report a staggering average asset loss of $41.2 million per family.
Which obviously skews toward high net worth individuals there, but it shows how the system scales to consume whatever resources are available.
Then Michigan has the highest percentage of currently stuck families at 62%. And Illinois shows documented cover-ups of sexual abuse within the court's networks.
Right. What's fascinating here is how state-level data reveals specific flavors of corruption. Take Kansas, for example.
Oh man, the Kansas data is absurd.
An average duration of 106 months and 21 cases of total access loss.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, 106 months is almost 9 years, you could send a rover to Mars and back multiple times before a Kansas family court resolves a custody dispute.
Exactly. And fighting a battle for a decade in these hotspots requires resources.
Which leads perfectly into the next devastating layer of this crisis. Section 3, the total financial annihilation of the family unit.
The financial ruin here is just hard to comprehend. We're looking at an aggregate harm of $66.7 million in attorney fees alone.
And $6.3 million in guardian ad litem fees, GALs.
Right. And the aggregate wage destruction metric actually reflects in the trillions over the lifespan of these cases. It's noted as a data anomaly just because of the sheer severity of lost livelihoods.
Because parents are spending 40 hours a week answering legal discovery instead of working.
Exactly. And look at the per-family medians. The average attorney cost is $61,308.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The median family income in the U.S. is roughly $60,000 a year.
Right.
So if a family makes $60K a year and the average attorney costs $61K, the math is literally impossible.
It's mathematically guaranteed ruin. And that impossible choice, pay rent or hire a lawyer, triggers what the report calls the pro se meltdown.
Pro se meaning representing yourself without a lawyer.
Yes. Nationwide, about 50% of these parents are forced to fight unrepresented. In Florida and Missouri, it nears 60%.
And why is fighting pro se such a disaster?
Because judges treat them as less credible. And practically, they can't afford the $4,000 retainers for special masters and evaluators the court mandates.
So they get labeled non-compliant just because they're broke?
Exactly. It's the economic weaponization of the court.
Look at the state-specific destruction. Pennsylvania averages $422,000 in lost wages per case. Texas averages $105,000 in attorney fees.
There's a quote from a California parent in the sources. They said, "I did all this because I couldn't afford an attorney." They essentially had to earn an unpaid law degree just to keep their kid.
So let me ask you this. Does the system actually rely on the financial exhaustion of the parent to close cases?
Yes. Financial exhaustion forces compliance with whatever the court demands.
Which means we need to look at exactly how they do this. Let's move to Section 4. The 9 recurring mechanisms. How does corruption become standard operating procedure?
The briefing details 9 systematic mechanisms. Number 1, malicious report leading to automatic removal. Number 2, dual system entanglement, which we talked about.
Number 3 is GAL and CAISA conflicts of interest. Number 4, impossible reunification requirements.
Number 5, judicial bias. Number 6, weaponized custody orders.
Number 7, retaliation for advocacy. Number 8, court insiders profiting. And number 9, permanent termination.
Let's focus heavily on false accusations, because 37.1% of families cite this as the engine of their separation.
That's almost 500 family court cases and over 200 malicious CPS reports. How does a single lie trigger all this?
It's a concept the briefing calls the burden reversed.
Okay, break that down for me.
In criminal court, you're innocent until proven guilty. But in family court, a single unvetted allegation triggers an automatic ex parte removal.
Ex parte meaning the accused parent isn't even in the room?
Right. They just take the child. Now, the accused parent has to spend thousands to prove a negative. They have to prove their innocence.
Which is incredibly hard. There's a real example from the sources here. CPS took a mother's children because she couldn't find her prescription medication for 10 hours.
Right. She found it 10 hours later, but the kids were already gone.
And then there's the court insiders profiting, mechanism 8. How does that work?
These insiders, GALs, therapists, they bill hourly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they have a perverse financial incentive to extend the case. If they resolve it, they stop getting paid.
Look at another example here. A parent was forced to do 6 to 7 custody exchanges per week on different days. It completely destroyed the daughter's schedule.
And generated endless billable hours for the professionals managing the conflict.
So what does this all mean? It sounds like a toll road where the people directing traffic are also the ones collecting the tolls.
That is exactly what it is.
And they have every reason to keep you driving in circles until you run out of gas. If a system is built on false allegations and financial exhaustion, the end product isn't reunification.
No, it's permanent fracture. Which brings us to Section 5, family separation as the engineered outcome.
Let's look at the actual custody verdicts of these 1,953 families. The numbers are staggering.
They really are. 40.3% of families, that's 787 families, lost primary or all access to their children.
Almost half. And what about joint custody? You'd think 50-50 is the default.
You would think so. But only 11.7% received 50-50 joint custody. It's considered the outcome most of the public thinks is fair, but it rarely happens.
And the worst part, nearly 27% had their children placed in foster care or had their rights permanently terminated.
If you synthesize this data, it proves that family separation is the default outcome. It is not a rare last resort for proven harm.
The system isn't correcting dysfunctional families, it's creating permanent separation.
Exactly.
But wait, let me ask a really dark question here. If nearly half of these parents are losing complete access, and we know 37% of cases started with a false accusation, how many children are being legally handed over to their actual abusers?
That is the terrifying reality.
Right.
By financially draining the protective parent, the court often defaults custody to the abuser who simply has more money to keep the litigation going.
And the generational trauma this creates, it's unthinkable.
Missed graduations, missed first dates. The developmental trauma compounds every single year. A judge saying, case closed after 7 years, doesn't restore a lost childhood.
It really doesn't. And to make sure these statistics don't just stay abstract numbers, we need to move to Section 6. We need to elevate the primary evidence, the voices of the parents themselves.
This is so important. In this data set, the parent's testimony isn't just venting. It's treated as the primary, most reliable evidence of systemic failure.
Right. They aren't disgruntled litigants. They are whistleblowers.
Yeah.
Let's look at some of these quotes. We have Meg from Kansas.
The namesake of the agent, yeah. What does she say?
She says, "It stripped my parental rights without proof, then kept the separation going through delays, restrictions, and retaliation."
Notice how she specifically names the mechanisms. No proof, delays, retaliation.
Then there's Morris in California. He frames the trauma as a constitutional violation driven by fraud.
Because they're bypassing due process entirely.
We also have an anonymous parent in Texas documenting extrinsic fraud and how it intentionally severed sibling bonds.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the sheer physical and financial toll is shocking. Look at Jackie from Alabama in Canada.
Oh my God, Jackie's story, she was battling breast cancer, right?
Yes, battling breast cancer, facing severe poverty, and the state suspended her driver's license because of a $600 a month child support order she couldn't pay.
How does suspending a cancer patient's help the child?
It doesn't. It's punitive. She ended up with a $40,000 arrears debt, while legal aid just dragged her along for a year doing nothing.
And there's an anonymous parent in Washington state. They are on SSI, earning $900 a month total.
And the court ordered them to pay $1,200 a month in child support.
Yes. It's mathematically impossible. And worse, they were physically attacked by their ex in front of the kids. But Washington state laws actually block CPS from removing the kids from the abusive home.
The recurring themes here are just glaring. Shock at the lack of due process, systemic complicity in abuse.
Some parents are naming names. Sierra from Kansas directly named Judge Mativi for awarding custody to an abuser with 0 witnesses while ignoring her 5 witnesses.
When you listen to these parents, you realize they aren't just complaining about losing a court case.
No, they are acting as whistleblowers reporting a crime scene, and the crime scene is the courtroom itself.
Exactly. And they haven't just shared their pain, they've mobilized. They've built a cohesive national blueprint for accountability.
Which brings us to the final section, the call for accountability and the reform demands. They have 8 non-negotiable reforms.
Let's run through them. Demand 1. Due process restoration. They want a probable cause hearing within 72 hours of removal.
Demand 2. False accusation accountability, meaning actual perjury and fraud charges for lying.
Demand 3. Eliminate financial incentives. Ban hourly billing for GALs.
Demand 4 is a mandatory appeals pathway. Demand 5. Eliminate dual system entanglement. CPS and family court cannot operate on you at the same time.
Demand 6. GAL and CASA independence. Mandatory recusal if they personally know the judge.
Demand 7. Extraordinary evidence required for termination of rights. And Demand 8. Investigative accuracy standards for CPS.
These aren't just vague ideas. These are highly precise legislative targets. They directly attack the mechanisms we talked about.
Right, like removing the financial incentive directly targets that 7.75-year average duration. If they don't get paid hourly, cases will close.
Exactly. And the intelligence packet provides action steps. You go to standwithmeg.com, download state-specific PDFs, identify your local judges, draft bills, and share them with the media.
For you, the listener, looking at this list of 8 demands, isn't it shocking that these aren't already the law?
It's mind-blowing.
How is it legal to terminate parental rights without clear and convincing evidence? Or to let a GAL bill hourly for a decade?
The overarching principle they're demanding is simple, but in this system, radical. Family separation should be the rarest outcome, not the default.
So we've covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We went from the macro view of 1,953 families across 50 states, proving this is a national crisis.
Down to the granular financial destruction.
Right, the 9 corrupt mechanisms, the double jeopardy, the pro-C meltdown. And we listened to the harrowing primary evidence voices of parents like Meg, Jackie, and Morris fighting for reform.
You came here today to get thoroughly informed on a complex topic without getting overwhelmed.
And what you're walking away with is the realization that this isn't just a legal issue. It's a civil rights crisis happening right in your own state.
It really is. And I want to leave you with a final lingering question to mull over.
Go for it.
If the family court system relies on the financial and emotional exhaustion of loving parents to sustain its own economy, what happens to a society when the very institution designed to protect children becomes the primary source of their trauma? Is true justice even possible in a system that monetizes the destruction of the family unit?
That is incredibly powerful and something we all need to be thinking about. Thank you all for joining us and diving deep into the sources today. Take care, everyone.